All right, so you know how sometimes you see a certain bike, you're like, whoa, that's a nice bike.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're talking Gazelle today, and like, what is it about those bikes?
Yeah.
They just scream classic, right? But they've been around since 1892.
Right.
Like, that's, what, over 130 years?
Wow.
That's wild.
Mm.
So we're doing a deep dive today, trying to figure out what makes them tick,
I like it.
why they're so iconic, why you should care.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say iconic because they're really kind of tied up with the history of cycling itself, especially in the Netherlands.
Totally. So we've got this awesome YouTube documentary and then like a really in-depth company history we found.
Nice.
So we're going to pull from both of those, but get this 1892 small town of Dieren, these two guys, Wilhelm Kelling and Rudolf Aronson just decided to start a bike company. What were they thinking?
I mean, you got to wonder. Well, actually, they started with importing bikes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, which makes sense. Tap into the market, figure out what people want.
Get a feel for it.
Exactly. But they quickly realized they could do it better.
Smart. And that's when they switched over from selling to actually making the bike.
Yeah, they saw an opportunity to make something really special, and that's where the name Gazelle comes in.
Okay, so why Gazelle, though?
It's not random.
Yeah.
Think about a gazelle, the animal, graceful, swift, agile, right? That's what they wanted for their bikes. It was more than just, a name. It was like a feeling.
I love that. And it clearly resonated because, look at them now. But here's the thing. We think of the Netherlands. It's all like windmills and tulips and everyone riding bikes. But was it always like that?
It's funny you say that because it's not that far off. But the late 1800s, early 1900s, you had this boom in cycling's popularity.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Think about the Netherlands. As flat cities were getting bigger bikes were the perfect solution.
That makes total sense.
Right. And so you've got Gazelle right there at the right time, right place.
Talk about timing.
It's like the Model T in America, this huge cultural shift. And there's this historian, David Herlihy. He wrote like the book on bicycles. And he says by the early 1900s, cycling in the Netherlands, it wasn't a trend, it was life.
Wow.
And Gazelle was right there growing with it.
So they're riding this wave of popularity. Things are looking good, and then bam, World War I.
Yeah, that had to be tough.
Talk about a setback. How do you even navigate something like that as a company?
Yeah.
Especially one that's still relatively new.
Right. Material shortages, who knows how many of their employees got sent off to fight.
It's incredible they didn't just give up right there.
Resilience, man, that's Gazelle. And here's the thing, what's crazy is by the 1920s, they're already branching out lighter models, tandem bikes. They just kept going.
So innovative.
Always thinking ahead, which, by the way, that reminds me, remember we were talking about innovation?
Yeah.
Okay, so get this. In the 1930s, they were already messing around with electric bikes.
Wait, you're kidding. Electric bikes back then.
Seriously, we think of e-bikes as this new thing.
Totally.
But Gazelle was on it way back when. Like they could see the future.
That's wild. So they're tinkering with e-bikes almost a century ago.
Yeah.
What else did they have up their sleeves? But then, of course, World War II hits and the whole world gets turned upside down again. What happens to Gazelle during all that?
Man, it was a rough time. Their factory got occupied even worse shortages than before. Can you imagine?
Trying to run a business like that? It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And they still made bikes.
They did. Not as many, obviously, but still, it shows you how dedicated they were.
Determined to keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when the war finally ended, it's like they were ready to help get their whole country back on two wheels.
For sure. I mean, that's a powerful image, right? Rebuilding together.
And that takes us to this really interesting moment in Gazelle's story, because it starts to become even more about the story of the Netherlands itself. So before, we were talking about World War II and, how they managed to keep making bikes. It's kind of hard to imagine.
Oh, yeah, in the middle of all that.
And then the war ends. What's that like for a company like Gazelle?
It's been amazing.
Right.
Relief, but also all this possibility.
Fresh start.
Exactly. And remember how we talked about that cycling boom before the war? Well, afterward, it went into overdrive.
Seriously.
Totally. The Netherlands needed to rebuild, and their government, they were all about cycling. Less pollution, less traffic. It was perfect for Gazelle.
Talk about being in the right place at the right time.
Right. And they didn't just ride the wave. They were pushing the limits of what bikes could be. For example, in the 50s and 60s, they started making their frames out of high-quality steel.
Okay. Today that's not a big deal, but back then...
Huge difference. I was reading the company history, and apparently, even now, vintage Gazelles from that era, people love them.
Really?
Yeah, they were built to last. Durable, but also surprisingly light.
Smart. They were making more than bikes. They were making like these little tanks.
Right. But stylish tanks, though. Because we got to talk about the tour popular.
Oh, yeah, that's the classic Gazelle bike. 1959. I can't believe they still make it.
It's timeless. That upright riding position built for cobblestones, but still stylish. It just works.
That's true. I've never even ridden one, but I can picture it perfectly. But it's not just about the popular bikes, right? They got some serious recognition, too.
Oh, for sure. Like in 1988, they got that royal designation from Princess Margaret herself.
Okay, I got to be honest. When I saw that in the research, I was like, what does that even mean? Explain it to me like I'm 5.
Basically, it's a huge honor.
Oh,
like
yeah.
getting a royal warrant in the UK, it means they're an official supplier to the Dutch royal family.
Wow.
It's about more than just selling bikes now. It's about being part of Dutch culture and history.
From this small town company to like a national treasure? That's amazing. And they never stopped innovating. Remember those electric bikes from the 1930s?
How could I forget? It's like they had a crystal ball or something.
Right. Then fast forward to like the late 90s, early 2000s. E-bikes are starting to become a thing. And guess who's already there?
Gazelle. Ahead of the curve again.
They were one of the first big companies to really get behind e-bikes, especially for cities.
They saw the potential right away. It wasn't just a fad. It was the future.
And speaking of the future, this is where things get really interesting. Because the world is changing in a big way, and Gazelle's along for the ride. So we've seen Gazelles go through wars, come up with all these new ideas, and even get the royal stamp of approval. That's quite the story, but now it's the 21st century, and like everything's changing so fast.
Right. What happens to a company like Gazelle when transportation itself is getting totally flipped on its head? It makes you wonder, right? And I feel like for some people, 2011 might have been a little scary because that's when Gazelle was bought by Pon Holdings.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. That's usually when people worry that a brand they love is going to lose what makes it special.
Right.
Right? Like the big company eats the smaller one.
Yeah, exactly. So Pon Holdings, they're this Dutch company, but they're not just anything. They're all about mobility. Cars, bikes, those big trucks you see at construction sites, even stuff for boats, like they move things.
So not some random company that just decided, hey, let's sell bikes.
Right. They actually already own some big bike brands too. Cervelo, Santa Cruz. Those are some quality bikes.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I didn't realize that. So they knew what they were doing. But what happened to Gazelle? Did it help? Did it hurt?
Honestly, I think it's been great for them. Like they got all these resources, they can make more bikes than ever, and now they're global.
But did they keep what made them Gazelle?
I think so. They still care about quality. They still make beautiful bikes, and they still have that Dutch design style.
So they leveled up, but they didn't sell out.
Gotcha. But we got to talk about the elephant in the room. Actually, maybe it's more like an e-scooters that have been past us in the bike lane. Because these days it's all ride-sharing apps and who knows, maybe even self-driving cars soon. What happens to a company that's all about traditional bikes in a world like that?
That's the big question, right? And, I was reading this interview with Gazelle's CEO. He gets it. He sees Gazelle as more than just bikes now.
Yeah.
They want to be a big part of how people get around cities.
Okay, so what does that actually look like? Paint me a picture. Okay, so think about it. Cities are packed. Everyone's trying to ditch their cars, and we're all thinking about the planet more and more, right? He wants to take that Dutch cycling culture, that feeling of freedom and practicality, but also being kind to the environment and share it with the whole world.
It's funny, we started by talking about that Gazelle bug. Like you see one and you're hooked, but now it's more than that, isn't it?
Totally.
Yeah.
Gazelle's story, it's like this reminder that sometimes the best solutions are the ones that have always worked. We just have to adapt and remember what matters.
I love that. So next time you see a Gazelle cruising down the road, remember this conversation. It might make you rethink how you get around and what's possible. From those classic bikes to the future of transportation, Gazelle shows us that moving forward is about good design, doing things right, and never forgetting where you came from.
The Herd Podcast is produced by the Gazelle International Owners Group on Facebook. The managing editor and executive producer is Gary Fujioka Sr.